welcome to the stage the first of our speakers, Dr. Heidi Kirby. Heidi, if you'd like to come on and introduce yourself to anyone here who might not already know you.
Hello, hi, yes. So I'm Dr. Heidi Kirby, and I have been in the L&D space for nearly a decade now. It's getting to the point where we stopped talking about how long it's been, but I've done instructional design roles, and I've led teams of instructional designers in both L&D and customer education.
Fantastic. And your counterpart for today's discussion, could I please welcome to the stage and ask to introduce themselves, Sam Taylor.
Hi everyone. So my background has been in all manner of roles, also inside of L&D, and most recently I've sort of looked at skills in both great behemoth organisations of sort of 300,000 people, all the way down to brand new startups of about 250 people. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining us. We are going to dive right in, but I would like to invite everyone in the chat to get involved during this. So we've got some questions that I would say we, but I really should just say I have decided in my omnipotence that are super important that we explore. But this time is yours. We're here for your development. Not just to cover what I think we should cover. So if there's a question we're not discussing that you think we need to, please do put it into the chat. I cannot promise you we will cover everything you put in there. One, we have a kind of topic area that we will stick to, and two, we only have limited time, but we will do our best to try and cover some, and if there are loads that we can't cover, we'll try and come out to you with answers sort of asynchronously. As a nice corporate word to round off that introduction. So Heidi, Sam, to kick us off, Sam, could you talk to us a little bit about when we talk about a skills-led culture, what that actually looks like day to day in operations, as opposed to kind of the, 300-meter corporate view of the term culture we often hear?
Yeah, I mean, you can often hear about skills-based cultures or skills-based organizations. I think fundamentally in the organizations that I've worked in, it's been around leveraging skills over capabilities, competencies, whatever the other buzzword of the week happens to be at the particular time. But it's about taking an approach where this isn't an L&D issue alone. It's actually integrated into your talent acquisition. It's integrated into your performance management processes. It's integrated into talent development, because skills by themselves are not going to grow and thrive in an organization when it's just L&D looking after it, because we need to have conversations around what skills do you need in a role. Well, that definitely feeds into your job profiles and role decisions. And there's even some things around a skills-based culture where it sort of transcends that concept of a job. There are some fundamental decisions you need to make. And by when I say you, actually, it's probably the business. Why are we doing this? And leadership around, do you even want to use the concept of a job anymore? And actually, is it about a profile where you're leveraging different skills to do a particular task at a point in time? That works obviously more neatly in a startup environment where it's usually all hands on deck.
Fantastic. And Heidi, do you want to chime in on that one as well? Kind of what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have much to add because that was pretty comprehensive. I love the part about including other people, because to really teach skills, you cannot do it with just one e-learning once, right? Like that's not how skills are taught. But I also think that from an L&D perspective, a really easy way to oversimplify it is to focus rather than focusing on what people know, focus on what they're doing, right? That's one really easy way to kind of like start to make that dive into the skills-led organization.
So one thing you kind of really touched on quite heavily there across those answers is that cross-functional working relationship, that this isn't just an L&D thing, which I think we would all agree is super easy and sounds powerful to say on a call like this. And then the reality of the world arrives with, these human beings who perhaps aren't great at working cross-functionally all the time. So in terms of in your experiences, what does that look like? What do we need to do? Because I'll be honest, most organizations I've worked in, that is not the reality on the ground at arrival. It might be somewhere we can get to, but it's very rarely happens by accident, as it were. Heidi, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, so I thought of a little metaphor for this one. Now, imagine you're working in an office, right? And you have a work friend at that office, and they've got a deadline, and they're really buckled down. They're in their cube. They don't want to be disturbed. They're really working towards this goal or this deadline. And you find out that there's a food truck coming to the office for lunch. Are you going to tell them, come on, leave your work and come get this food truck food with me? No, if you're a good work friend, you're going to say, hey, what do you want from this food truck? I'll grab you something and bring it to you, right? So we need to treat that skills-led kind of approach the very same way, right? We don't want to just create a bunch of e-learning that lives in our own LMS and expect busy people, overwhelmed people that are working under limited budgets to come to us. Instead, we have to take those things to them. And the other thing is to figure out which skills affect the most people, right? Like figure out those, cast that very broad net, find out like what are the 20% of skills that 80% of our workforce all need, right? And those should be things that you're already covering in onboarding. You might not be, but you should be. And so look at that, look for those skills. And so, for like a startup, that might be something like problem solving skills, project management, technical skills on the actual product that the startup is selling, right? And so, find out where people are doing things. Does the marketing department have an email that they send out to the entire department every week? Get a little paragraph in that email talking about project management, right? If the sales leaders meet bi-weekly, grab one of those meetings and ask if you can have 15 minutes and sell it as, hey, we'd love to have 15 minutes at your sales leader meeting to talk about problem solving skills, rather than making you all come to this 30-minute e-learning in our LMS, right? Like go to the people, go where they are, do little things and start to lay that breadcrumb trail of what those skills look like.
Great stuff. And Sam, do you want to continue on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from a broader people team perspective, chances are some of this stuff is going on in pockets. So obviously it depends on the size of your organization. When I was working for a startup, we had a people team of 5 people. So actually figuring out what everybody else was working on was quite easy to get in and involved on that. And I actually got brought in to help out from the talent side to move the project forward. But I think the other interesting thing is, again, from the people team perspective, I was at an event probably about in March time that was all about skills and building skills-based cultures, but it was fixated from a talent acquisition side of things. The conversations they were having, the discussions, the challenges, the problems, everything was exactly the same conversation that we'd had at Learning Technologies the year before. So I think there's a real opportunity to actually just, certainly within our own functions, sit and talk to one another and look for those areas of commonality that actually, I suppose, building on Heidi's food truck, if it's, I know you're doing a team lunch, what can each person bring to contribute towards that team lunch? Because obviously a problem that's sort of shared amongst you is going to be a lot easier to get through things. And I think I suppose the final thing on that is it's going to take talking to one another and agreed definitions back to the sort of the intro conversation. What do skills mean for us? What does skills development look like? How are we going to record this? Where are we going to record this? Are we going to have a consistent terminology for what a skill is, even between functions? So there's lots of things where you do need to build a consensus or at least a discursive culture in order to make this succeed. Just going off and working in a silo, it's going to fall flat.
Love that. That's great stuff. And I think one thing that struck me listening to both of you there is there's so much conversation in specifically L&D for a moment at the minute about how do we show value? How do we prove that we're valuable to the organization? And we tend to obsess about that being like a number or a somewhat ambiguous return on investment claim that we can't quite prove, but we're going to make anyway. this would be a great example of, there's no number attached to this, but aligning with these same problems as other areas is a wonderful opportunity to show value to other functions. It may not go, hey, training solved these problems, but it is us showing value. So a really nice opportunity to branch beyond this there. With that, though, I want to move on slightly to, we were focusing somewhat today on small, medium businesses specifically. So often, and this is going to be a bit of a generalization, but often small and medium businesses do not have massive budgets dedicated to L&D departments in their entirety. Specific skills-based initiatives probably get a slice of that pie, not even all of it. So what's the most effective and probably cost-effective, I guess, is part of this discussion, way of embedding skills development without overwhelming the business, the function, or the budget, which I appreciate is a bit like the I want it good, I want it fast, I want it cheap discussion. Sam, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, Heidi's kind of already touched on this a little bit in the previous questions. Yeah. But I think the number one thing to remember about skills is that skills has nothing to do really with courses. Certainly in one of the bigger organizations I was working in, there was a huge focus on skills development and using a really expensive system. And it was all about how you could move up that skill level from a level 1 potentially up to a level 9. There's going to be a certain point in that scale where a course is not going to be effective. You're not actually going to develop a skill. A skill is developed through practice. So actually from when you do not have unlimited budget, and in my previous organization, I had zero budget, it's looking at the broader definition of learning, moving away from learning equals course and actually looking for the opportunities. What are the gigs? What are the projects? What are the stretch assignments? Who are the mentors? What are the opportunities to actually get exposure to that skill, be it job shadowing, all of that kind of stuff that will actually build someone's exposure to a skill and give them the opportunity to practice it. That being said, there's again going to be that caveat that you're going to have to work on those line managers to make sure that, yeah, it's all right having somebody who isn't necessarily 100% at that skill and they're actually going to be practicing something, to actually get them into that mindset of it may not be perfect because that individual is learning.
Love it, and that's gone down very well in the chat as well. I think there's that frustration, isn't there? Right, if you're going to L&D, some form of learning must be the problem. It must be a cognitive issue. It must be something we can train away. Heidi, do you want to pick us up on how we decide which skills to focus on, especially kind of where, not again, this is a bit of a sweeping brush moment, but everyone thinks their need is urgent. Right. So how do we do that prioritization piece with skills?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but if you look at kind of the skills that 80% of your workforce all need, right? You wouldn't be able to paint like a really broad brush because that's going to be the way that you show the most value, right? And again, like as Sam's been saying, like, this is not just a training learning thing. Like you also need to talk with your recruiters and your leadership and your C-suite and say like, okay, yes, we can teach some of this, but also we need to be hiring for these things as well, right? Like these are the skills that everyone needs to have, and decide what can be hired for and what can be taught, right? So like, for instance, for SaaS companies, right? Startups, software as a service, right? You've got a product, and a lot of people coming in may not know the product, but they might have really good critical thinking skills and they might have really good problem solving skills. So figure out what those skills are that you need to hire for and what you can teach. And then like Sam said, you know, it's not about one e-learning, right? Or, you know, we have a 3-hour in-person leadership development program. That's not a leadership development program. And look for what those skills are across the board. And I would say that a bad way to do this is by looking at job descriptions, because I've seen a lot of companies just take, like, let's take every job description and compare them all to see what skills they have in common. Well, first of all, those are our wish lists, right? and you may not be hiring people with those specific skill sets. So you really kind of have to look at day to day, what do we need? What do we have? What are we lacking? And then, the needs assessment piece really has to be there. And if you don't do that and you've never done it before and you just take whatever comes into the form, then you probably need to look at your process as well.
Or not have a form at all. Scary.
Or not have a form
Maybe
at all.
people being able to request something specific is a bad idea. But before that blows up in my face horrendously for poking at that particular bear today, there was a question that because we prep for these things, this was an important enough event that we actually got together ahead of time. Those who have done events with me before know this is a massive rarity. Tom doesn't rehearse, he just shows up. The question I think we were all quite eager to get into, which I think touches on a lot of what makes all of this so challenging, is the role of managers, line managers, middle management, senior leadership in all of this. So what role do managers play in reinforcing or perhaps undermining a skills-based approach? And how can we help them? How can we enable managers to be a positive force in this? Sam, do you want to kick us off on this, and then we'll come to Heidi?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Fred said just before the session started, which is the problem is that for a lot of managers and for a lot of leaders, we have to get them to let go of the way it's always been. If you go, I remember in my last role, we were going out, we were leveraging a skills-based recruitment platform, as much as anything to actually increase the inclusion and sort of the breadth of potential candidates that we could get. And we had a conversation with a senior leader. What are the skills that you need for this role? Getting a manager to articulate skills is really tricky. There needs to, I don't want to even use the word development course, but there needs to be something that you do with that population in order to, and again, it goes back to that bit that I said at the beginning, you've got to get the business on board. This has to be led by the business so that they're speaking, or we're all speaking the same language. We obviously don't want it to be a learning speak thing. So, I mean, I think it's sitting down and knowing that this potentially is going to be very painful and potentially being that annoying toddler going, why, when they're saying particular skills, to get to what is it that you really need? Because I think ultimately skills are not the end goal of this. Performance is the end goal of this. So how can we, so it's potentially, to Heidi's point before, reframing some of the questions we might traditionally have asked them in order to try and get to what are the performance outcomes that we're looking for and what do they need to be doing. I think the key thing for me usually is of trying to discourage people from asking or asking them the question of what do people need to know. It's not that, it's what do they need to do. These days you can look stuff up, you can chat GPT it in 30 seconds. So what do we want people to be doing? And that will give us that idea of what a skill is, because that's usually your knowledge in practice.
Love it. I think that point about bringing us to performance, I think this is where this conversation inevitably needs to change. Often, and sorry, I'll hand over to you in a minute, Heidi, but it's one of those words. I get excited whenever someone brings it up, and it's not me. This is good. But it's so often missing from the skills conversation because of this perception that skills are taught and therefore are training related and therefore are knowledge driven. They may have a knowledge foundation, as most things do, but as you say, that the size of that required foundation of knowledge is shrinking because of our ability to access information quickly, to search, to ChatGPT. Though the idea of ChatGPT as a search engine still makes me incredibly nervous. It's good 90% of the time, but that 10% is disastrous, depending on what you're doing. But you know, so that's really exciting. It's something I'd say to everyone watching and listening. Keep that in the center of your thoughts moving forwards through the rest of this conversation and the remaining sessions, is how does this tie to performance? Whether you're looking at from a Rumler or a Gilbert or whatever perspective, I tend to come at it from kind of like a behavior engineering perspective. Think about how it ties into that, because the worst thing we can do is view all things skills as one totally separate thing to all our performance engagement approaches, rather than viewing them as one and the same and all part of one cohesive approach. Sorry, I've gone on. Heidi, let me hand that over to you.
Yeah, I think understanding how important managers are to an organization, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, right? But there are research studies that show that your manager is as impactful on your mental health as your partner, right? There are studies that actually show that and prove that. And we're not just talking about managers across the organization. What's really, really important is the L&D managers as well, and the L&D leadership, because that's where these things can really fall flat. And I've seen it happen is if you have people in L&D leadership positions that don't understand performance, that think that a learning program is giving everybody access to LinkedIn Learning and then walking away from the Michael Bay explosion, like that's not it's not a feasible solution. So really being able to influence and explain yourself, right, is really, really key to helping those people understand how important this is. And one of the things that, you have to really learn how to do is be influential, right? To build trust, and then to be able to leverage that trust and speak the language that the company understands, right? I had a VP of product who wanted to measure our customer education program success on completions and survey results. And I was like, oh, especially with customers, right? I was like, listen, we don't want them to complete these courses because we want them to get what they need, get the heck out, and go actually use the software that we're selling them. And so when I put it that way, like time saved, they're going into the product faster. This is a VP of product, like that, light bulbs. He's like, oh yeah, like that's what we want. We want them in the product faster. We want them to have their questions answered faster. So you just have to learn how to speak the language that'll reach them and kind of influence them as well.
Brilliant. We have got some really fantastic stuff going on in the chat that I think it's worth quickly touching on, specifically around conversations relating to how this all boils down to tasks. Because there is an increasing conversation around skills or tasks. To me, and I'll kick off, and I'd like to hand over to both of you. The skills or tasks argument is a bit like the courses or resources argument. It's a little bit of an oversimplification to my mind to say it's neither or, it's both. The idea, again, like I said at the start, that there is one thing that's going to guide us to the right thing, I don't think is ever true pretty much in our space. There's always nuance and gray between those things. I do think that a good skill is inherently defined by the tasks it enables you to complete in a specific context, and therefore a good skill is domain specific. It's not people skills. That's one of those sentences like, what do you mean by that? Because arguably I could stand here and you can go, Tom has great people skills. Then you could meet me in person and go, oh my God, Tom has no people skills. It really depends on the domain and the context. That's probably a bad example and a bit too insightful for a work-based event, isn't it? But yeah, so I don't think they're an either or. I don't think it's an either or argument. I think it is there a strong connection? When there isn't, I would agree that skills become this vague L&D buzzword kind of thing that we go, oh, it's great because you're a level 3 people skills practitioner, and no one knows what that means and it has no practical use. But when we can say, oh no, actually, because you've got, I don't know, this skill, that skill, and that skill, we know you can reliably deliver this task, that is when it becomes useful. But I appreciate that's not everyone's perspective. So Sam, do you want to jump in on that first? Have you got anything you'd like to kind of put into that conversation?
No, I mean, I know I read it recently, but I know that Nick Shackleton-Jones has spoken a lot about the connection between skills and tasks when he's been looking at, obviously, buzzwords of the moment. So yeah, I would agree that And again, not necessarily from the smaller company, but from the larger organization, I remember a huge argument I was having that the skill of marketing, which is still too big a skill. There's a lot more to it than that. The organization wanted one course or one collection of content and resources on the concept of marketing that would cover different levels. And my argument was, well, the skill for me as an L&D practitioner in marketing is very different to the skill that someone of my equivalent level who works in a marketing function would need to have. So I think it's back to that task. Task gives you the context, and I think that's the key thing. It's sometimes we love the idea of skills because we think we can just get to this sort of nice philosophical academic concept of what something is and what you need to be thinking about, and let's shove a few hundred models at people so that they can just dive boredom from those instead. But actually it's nothing without the context in which you're applying it, and sort of why are you doing this, or at least giving them the ability to think around, if these are the principles, how do I apply these in this particular context? If I move from this function to this function, or this set of job roles or this set of tasks, how can I take that knowledge and reapply it somewhere else?
Absolutely. I think the danger otherwise is we end up as the workplace education department, where we teach people and educate them with these wonderful, maybe really useful life things, and they find very interesting, but doesn't actually support the organization, which is our kind of, job, as opposed to being just life teachers. Heidi, would you like to jump in on this as well?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think you both have covered it quite adequately, and I tend to agree with you, Tom. But I think maybe on the task side, maybe I would just encourage everyone to stop making entire courses based on one task. That's a great place to start as well, because I see that constantly, and I especially see it with newer people, like when they create portfolios and things like that, right? They'll do a whole half an hour e-learning on one task, right? And it goes back to that performance. It goes back to the behavioral engineering and how do we support people in their work as they're working. It goes back to the conversation about how to get leaders involved and how to get managers involved and how to do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm already stretched thin, budget thin people, right? Is to make sure that if it is a task, what is the least resistance thing that we can provide to help people do that task better? Whereas the skill is, like you both said, like the task within context, right? These are mouthful words that we're using here today too, by the way.
It's the wrong time of year for big words and long sentences, isn't it? It's summer. We should all just be going yes, no, something in between. That's we need the equivalent of multiple choice questions for the rest of this.
Yes.
That's no, we've got a couple more questions actually from the chat before we come back to our last couple of predefined ones. So one for some reason it's not pulling through your name. I do apologize, LinkedIn user. I'm certain that's not what's on your account. Do we think that the focus on skills remains prominent because our educational systems are still heavily reliant on the industrialized approach to education? Talk about big words and big questions, and then we get this one. What do we think, or do we not know? Because I realize there is a strong chance that certainly I read this and went, I need to do some research and come back to you in a week with my answer to that one. Is my personal position on that? I'm afraid. I wish I had an answer for you. But Heidi, Sand, either of you feel comfortable going at that off the cuff, or?
I mean, I'd want to do some more digging, but I would argue that skills has only just started to have a resurgence, and I think it's because historically, from an L&D context, whenever we referred to skills, as I said at the start, could be interchanged with competencies, behaviours, whatever. Again, without anybody truly understanding what those things were. And we as L&D practitioners tended to use them more as a classification system to dump millions and millions of boring courses into our LMSs for people to access them. and then you just sort of, as an end user, aimlessly click through stuff. I would argue, part of me wants to say that I don't think skills do reflect an industrialized approach to education, because I think if they did, we'd be learning a lot of different stuff at school. That's my initial gut response. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was advocating for more practical based stuff. And it's like, well, I've definitely never needed to calculate the circumference of a bicycle chain in my working life that I had to do in my GCSE maths. So I think it's there's a lot of skills that we need in the place of work that I don't think our education system has actually been giving people. So that might be more topic and content, and again, but that's just my initial gut response.
Oh, Tom, are you muted?
I can't hear you, Tom.
Sorry, I am, yes. Heidi, is there anything you'd like to add on that one?
So I know Latoya, who asked this question, and I'm guessing I know like her perspective on it. And I think, you know, Sam, to your point, the reason we kind of got away from skills a little bit is because, I mean, if we really want to get philosophical about it, we can talk about how we started with behaviorism and then moved into this more constructivist view of education. And that caused us to care more about people and communication and interaction. And we got a little bit away from behavior and performance, maybe a little bit too much. And I love how learner-centered we've become as a result of that more constructivist approach. But I think that we kind of lost something. You know, humans, we have a tendency to overcorrect, right? We let the pendulum swing a little too far the other way, and then we find kind of like a balance in the middle. And I hope that that's what we're doing now, is kind of finding this balance between communication and, you know, this amorphous, abstract learning and like skills and performance.
Marvelous. You might even call it a blend. But there we go. Well, sorry. And we've got one more. I think one more thing to pick up from the chat before we dive back in. I think it has squeezed it all onto screen. It just happens to be a big one. So, Gustavo has analysed the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report from 2016 to 2025. This is one of my favourite reports, so this makes me very happy. And it seems like essential skills haven't changed that much. But at least in Brazil, the way L&D has developed skills has not changed either. Why do businesses and L&D consultants keep insisting on ignoring that education is not transmission of content? So let's dive. Anyone got any opinions on this? Probably not, I guess. No, pretty dull topic.
Okay.
I was going to say they actually haven't changed since. I can't remember who wrote it, but there was a book that came out in about 2011 called Future Skills. And when I looked up what was in that book that I bought in 2011 to this year's report, guess what was still exactly the same? It is. I actually had a massive rant on LinkedIn about it at some point this year, because I said, why have we learned nothing? Why are we repeating exactly the same things year on year? Or why is it not sticking? So, I mean, I think the problem is culturally in a lot of organizations, learning still equals course. It's one of my big bugbears and one of the things that I will rant about on any given day of the week. And similar to Heidi's point, I don't care if anybody ever goes in my LMS to access content. I care that they can do the job. I would rather they go and look up a quick reference guide on the intranet than sit through some pointless LinkedIn learning course. So I think it comes down to what is the point of L&D inside of organizations. And to Heidi's point just now, we're moving back towards that focus on actually it's about performance, and trying to, again, it's probably less about us and probably more about getting the business to realize that that's what the goal is. Even things that I'm doing internally, which is I'm doing my best to try and stamp out the use of the word training anywhere, because I really start twitching, because it feels like that is industrial revolution. We're going to tell you everything that you need to know. rather than how can you actually perform better in your job.
Excellent stuff. So I have a similar thing to the term just learning in general. I wonder if all our talk of learning learning is at the heart of our business. It's the most important thing to us. That's a weird business. My business is there to make money. We might have to learn something in order to do that, but money is at the heart of every business. I think you'll find, not learning. Heidi, anything you'd like to add to that point before we move on?
Yeah, it's interesting because we also, Tom, you and I have looked at actually the change between those two reports from 2016 to 2025. And the biggest shock was that they didn't realize how quickly technology would impact. They didn't realize how fast. Like, they knew it was coming, they knew AI was coming, but they didn't realize how quickly it would impact and change things for the workforce. And yet we still remain unchanged in our own little corner. And I have a theory about it. I have this theory that most humans just want to like take an easy path, right? Like, they just want to go to work, do the job, not ruffle any feathers, not be particularly innovative, but also not particularly, risk taking, right? On the other hand. So, there are so many people right now who are not tuned into this, who are just happily plunking along, making their courses about, not burning your hand on a fryer or, like something else that shouldn't be a course, right? And they're going to continue to do that because that's the reputation we've set for ourselves, right? And that's what a lot of companies now expect. And they have no other expectations. And if we don't bring them what could be, what is possible, then they'll never know any different, right? It's like why people come to us and say, I need a 30-minute e-learning on how to play tennis. And it's like, well, why do we need a 30? That's a very specific number and a very specific ask, And then once you start uncovering it, it's because I always use the example of when I first became of age to drink alcohol, I ordered a Long Island at every single bar because it was the only drink that I knew existed, right? And so when we have these leaders in our organizations, they do the same thing. They go, well, I know what an e-learning is, so I'm going to order that. Or I know what an instructor-led training is, so I'm going to order that. Without really thinking about it, without really taking a moment to say, is there a different way or a better way that we can do this?
Great stuff. So I want to take us back to a question that we all agreed that we really wanted to get into before we run out of time, basically. And thank you for everyone throwing more into the chat. We will come back to you if we have time. And if not, I'll make sure we get answers out after the case. So many organizations talk about skills-led approaches, cultures, organizations, all the terms. But almost all of them, certainly that I've seen, at some point default back to standard job titles, hierarchy, job description-based training. How do we stop skills focused, skills centered, whatever the thing being, just being a great buzz term to, for a consultant to sell a service or sell a product, or for an organization to reorganize the L&D function and then nothing happen? How do we stop that backslide? Sam, do you want to kick us off?
I mean, it's the holy grail, isn't it? How do we stop? I mean, I think it goes back to the business owning it, and it goes back to the business owning it and the business knowing that it's going to be a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. Because let's face it, tearing up the way that you have always been recruited, recruit for others, thought about recruitment, thought about development, thought about talent management, thought about talent mobility, thought about performance management, tearing up every single rule potentially and doing something from a very different perspective is I'd say it's almost a luxury that very few organizations can have. And so I think you'll probably find out through the later sessions today, how can you start small and just chip away at some of the things? For me, it would be starting with the actual title of the job. And maybe for even the people who are applying for jobs, when we think about skills, one of the big sells is that obviously you've got Generation Z plus whatever the next one is, and an Alpha and whatever coming in, and they're going to have portfolio careers and lots of gigs and do different things, but yet they're still asking for jobs and job titles. And even when we've recruited them from a tech perspective as software developers, they're expecting to go from a junior to a medium to an advanced in a short period of time. So there's still that legacy mindset. So I think it's at a macro scale, it's a fundamental change. So it's going to be about a consistent commitment, reinforced communication, reinforced messages, deciding what your approach is going to be, how far you're going to go down that approach, sticking with it, slogging with it, making sure everybody is saying the same thing, because otherwise, yeah, it will backslide and it'll just become another classification system. And I think the other thing to add with this is that, and it was kind of covered on the intro session, skills will continue to change in a lot of places. What is a hot skill one quarter might be different even midway through the next quarter. So you can't just say it's January, this is what our skills are going to be, and this is what our skills framework is going to look like forever. You're going to have to keep checking in on that every time you've got a new vacancy, every time you're about to run a new program. You want to be checking in around what those skills are, and are they still the right skills? Are they still the priority skills? So yeah, it's not an easy task by any means.
Absolutely.
Heidi, a bit depressing, sorry.
Thing is, though, the danger, I think, is that we do view this as an easy thing. That it's simple, that it's build a framework and then align your training to the framework. And guess what? It doesn't work. And therefore everyone goes, oh, skills is nonsense because that doesn't work. So what, you mean a terrible implementation of a misunderstanding doesn't work? My goodness, you're right. Throw it all out. And yet so often that is the conversation. Because it is so rarely done well, we have a tendency to throw the idea out. Rather than, looking back a little bit, dare I say it, to the work done in the 70s around performance, which maybe doesn't translate one-to-one, requires contextualization, but would guide us on this idea of putting the task first and working backwards and all these kinds of things. Sorry, Heidi, do you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I think +1 to what all two of you are saying here, but also, for anyone who's in a position to do this, making sure that your leadership of your L&D team and of your HR recruiting teams have knowledge of performance, have knowledge of adult learning, especially your L&D leaders. There's so many of them that are coming from other areas now, and it's a growing problem. It's something I'm actually currently researching because it's such a growing problem, because in order to have a champion for the work that Sam's describing that this takes, for the slog that it is, you really need to have somebody in that L&D leadership position who is ready for that battle, because the second you start making the pizza and start taking training orders, you've totally lost any ground that you made, right? So there has to be a level of resilience that is required to not only find those interdepartmental opportunities and where those little skill pockets are already happening, but also to influence leadership to get on board, and also to be able to take those small steps that it requires.
Fantastic. Well, that was kind of the end of our kind of prescripted questions that we needed to cover, or that I felt we needed to cover. But we do have some more in the chat, and we've got a little bit of time left. So Jen has asked, how do you see individual development plans as part of the L&D strategy for helping employees achieve what they want / need? Those last two words really change depending on which one you choose to answer, or both. Would anyone like to jump in on this one?
I've got to see if Heidi wanted to go
first. We're both silent. This is a hard one, because I think I have worked in organizations where individual development plans were for show only, right? They were just to prove to the rest of HR that look at how much we're supporting our employees. And I distinctly remember a VP of HR getting angry that despite all of these cool things that they did for the employees, that the employees still rated their professional development opportunities low on the employee engagement survey. I remember a meeting with this VP where they were just I can't believe how ungrateful these people are. And it was ooh, that's, So the culture is incredibly important for those individual development plans, because if your individual development plan says, I want to become a people leader someday, and there's no path for you to do that in your current organization, guess what that person's going to do? They're not going to stay, right? So I think that you really have to consider, do we offer the pathway forward for this if this is something we're going to offer? And on my best team, in the best company that I worked for, my team's individual development plans included the stretch projects that they wanted to do to learn new things, and the employee resource group work that they were doing. Like, one of my team members was the lead of the LGBT employee resource group. I added goals in there specifically part of that, so that became part of that person's performance, because those other things that people do are also important. And if we don't include what they want and need, we're going to lose them. And getting them to think about those things is a recipe for turnover, right? Because if you get people to start thinking about what do they want, what do they want to do, what do they want to be when they grow up, and the answer is not this, they're going to leave, right? So you have to be careful when you even give people this opportunity.
Great stuff. Sam, anything you'd like to go into on this one?
Well, I was thinking it could be an opportunity for another round. There's part of me that really hates individual development plans as a construct that sits inside of a performance management process, because we're always learning. Every single day there is an opportunity for us to learn, and having some structured document makes it feel like learning is an add-on rather than this is what your life is like. For us, skills and learning, our ability to learn new skills and respond to different tasks and different contexts, is our unique competitive advantage as an individual that will keep us employed and with cash to be able to buy all the things that we want to buy in our lives. So I think in some ways I would want to I think it's where technology can actually play a really useful part in this, because in some of the systems that I have seen, and some of them are only ever really suitable or won't even talk to you unless you're over 500 people, but there are now more tools that are coming on board that are actually better suited for smaller organizations. You could come in as a customer service advisor in a bank or even in a retail organization and say, I fancy working in marketing. And because of the magic of skills and the magic of technology, it can say, well, these are the things that you've got, these are the things that you're missing. And then to Heidi's point, here are some of the ideas of stuff that you can do. I also think it links us back round to that, what's the role of the manager? Because actually, for me, it's about a manager being able to do some really good coaching with that individual to get to so how do you think you can get to being that marketing manager from your current role? What do you think you could do? What are the opportunities? How can I help you get there? How can I help you look for the right gigs, introduce you to the right people? So yeah, I think that's probably what I would go for. And again, it's weird because it's not necessarily an L&D strategy as such. It's actually just saying, we're going to provide the mechanisms, your life, your journey, your career, go where you want to go. Obviously, there will always be more formal things maybe from a talent program perspective, but yeah, it's about putting the onus back on the individual, not on. I always get a bit frustrated. It's like, why should we be telling people how to get to their career destination? You need to do some of that legwork. It's your career, and if you exit because actually you've realized that opportunity is there. But as long as we've supported you, there might be an opportunity for you to come back in the future.
I think that's great. I think it always concerns me a little bit whenever there's an element of career advice, maybe, in these things. It's a bit like, oh, that's really dangerous ground. Are you really qualified to give that advice? Have you done that? Do you know that works? Or are you following handbook number whatever that someone wrote 10 years ago, and that advice is actually going to cost them the next job? And, I think there's potential still a lot of damage if you aren't very careful in that space. You can tell I dodged those conversations in every team I was ever on. But I don't want to do that. That sounds dangerous. Let's call this our last question because we are coming up on time, and it is a great one to finish on. So thank you for this. What unexpected challenges have you encountered when shifting to a skills-led culture, and how did you overcome it? This was not a plant. We did not ask someone to ask this question. It just happens to be a very good question to finish this talk on. Heidi, do you want to kick us off on this, and then we'll finish off with Sam?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't know if there have been unexpected, like you kind of see it coming a mile away, I think. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I've faced is just people's preconceived notions of what things are, right? Like even in this conversation today, we've had to define skills and skills-led organization a little bit. And we may not be all on the same page in how we define skills, right? So I think like taking it back a step and really like getting back to like the yellow books for dummies, right? Like skills-led organization for dummies, and realizing that like, not everybody may be speaking the same language. So you kind of have to like walk it all the way back. But one of the other, I guess that there was an unexpected challenge that somebody who should have known better in our organization, like really just wanted to take every single job description and like find keywords and then use those keywords to make a giant skills framework. And that process was taking like a year and a half for someone to do, by which point they realized half of the job descriptions were outdated. And then that this had become so massive, it was going to take another 2 years, by which point all of those skills would be out of date. And so it really is the communication piece, I think, is like you can't over communicate when you're doing change management.
Makes a lot of sense. And Sam, could you offer your answer for our last question?
I suppose we've kind of covered a lot of them already in terms of the challenges. Were they expected or unexpected? I don't know. Sometimes you kind of hope that the people that you were talking to would know more about this than you were expecting to. And I think it comes more around that definition, identification of skills / performance outcomes, because that struggle to get from somebody who was a chief operating officer in an organization to articulate what it was that person needed to do at a task and skill level. Admittedly, would a chief operating officer really know what the lower down levels would do? But it was quite a tiny organization. And the way in which they spoke about it was, we need someone like the person who's already there. So it's linking it back into characteristics, not skills. And I think one of the potential advantages of skills is that they are more inclusive because they're more almost agnostic. It's looking for, can you do this task? Doesn't matter about what your experience is, how or the way in which that experience has been earned, or a specific qualification, but actually, can you do that particular task? The classic example that we used to have was looking to recruit a new project manager, relatively junior role. We want somebody with a Prince 2 qualification. Or what about that return to work parent who has spent the last 3 years juggling multiple schedules, drop-offs, pickups, looking after everything? They've got that project management skill. It's just been learned and applied in a different context. So I think that's the challenge, but it's also an opportunity to actually look beyond what is known. Absolutely. So sometimes there's a challenge around thinking laterally around a skill. What you call one thing may actually be realistically something else.
I think that's a fantastic example of that cross-functional value that we actually started the session talking about there. An opportunity for skills to not just be an L&D piece, but actually something that brings sort of some equity into the organization in terms of who can possibly be brought into a role?